number one piece of knowledge that they would have had is the nature of human consciousness, how it can be manipulated, how it can be guided. And this is where I pick up the trail in a modern time. I did this in my Cult of the Medics documentary. We get in a little bit into this history, where I was looking at the Knights of Malta, which is a sort of another sort of brotherhood group. That was the Holy Order of the Vatican, really. When the Templars were disbanded, quote unquote, which they just took some of the main guys, executed them for show, and the rest were all, you know, sent underground to Switzerland, Portugal, Canada, etc. And once they got rid of the Templars, they brought in any of the remaining Templars, their wealth and the knowledge that they had procured, brought them into the order of what was it was called the Knights Hospitaller, but was later the Order of St. John, and then now the Knights of Malta. And those are the guys that are progenitors of both the pharmaceutical and medical industrial complex and all of your intelligence agencies in America, in Israel, in Europe. So you have like basically all the top founding members of the CIA, for example, every single one of them were card-carrying Knights of Malta.
Welcome to Far with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I'm excited and delighted to be joined once again by my old friend David Whitehead, the Truth Warrior. Let me tell you about this incredible Canadian guy and what he's been up to. He's been very busy. If you follow a lot of my friends' podcasts, I'm sure you've seen him make more than one cameo back. He's a wealth of information. So David's a full-time podcaster. He's a martial artist. He's a coach. He's an entrepreneur. He's a public speaker with a lifetime of study and interest in esoteric information, philosophy, comparative religion and mythology, ancient and modern mysteries, paranormal, and the current geopolitical events and, as they say, these things of our time. He's an avid adventurer. He's an independent researcher. And he has a quest to seek answers to many of the most challenging questions of our time. The basis of his work is founded on sincere pursuit of truth, wherever it may lead, with an emphasis on facing and conquering fear and self-imposed limitation. You can see now, you're all reminded, if you haven't seen my first interview with David, why I am excited to be once again talking to this man. David, thank you so much for beaming in, brother. It's a pleasure to have you back.
Oh, Faust, thank you so much, and appreciate you bearing with all the back and forth. It's been a crazy time as of late, but I'm so happy to be here. Glad we got it.
Me too, man. I'm glad we finally found a time to make it work. So, I was like, man, dude, you have so much knowledge, and I love tuning into your podcast on some of my friends when you're a guest on their shows, because I always learn something new, and I'm always like, man, this guy, I just love how deep you dive when you get into something. And so I was excited to have you back, and I thought, you have such a vast knowledge about secret societies and certain ones in particular, and I thought, this is just so extremely relevant to the power structures that are in place today. Let me bring David back on, and let's get into some of the origin stories, which is always fascinating, I think, for people to learn about, of some of these secret societies. So, everyone, buckle up. We're gonna get into it. I thought we would start with the Templars, right? Which people may or may not know. They were officially founded in the 12th century as a monastic order of warrior monks. But beyond their public persona and mission to, quote, protect pilgrims, I'm wondering what you think that their deeper, possibly hidden purpose truly was, and what might they have been, what was their actual task from the beginning, and from what you've studied?
Huge subject. I am not like an official expert on the Templars or historian, but I have definitely dabbled. I've got a bunch of books actually sitting right in front of me. I got The Knights Templar Revealed by Alan Butler and Stephen Defoe, Stephen Knight's The Brotherhood, some stuff by Nicholas Hagar, some phenomenal books that have already been done, asking these same questions. And of course, I work with my good friend and colleague, Michael Tessarian, who is the foremost expert, in my opinion, on this subject. He's written numerous articles on it. We've done a lot of shows on this on the Unslaved podcast, getting into this. And like Gary Wayne was a guest we had on. He's another great one to get in. Yeah, Gary's done great stuff on this. So what I'm here to do is just kind of point people to the authors they need to be reading to get into this, because let's just look at it like this. What I can tell you is that the Templars have this sort of official history that's been told. And if you go just a little deeper than that, a whole labyrinthine thing opens up, and it's quite fascinating, and it's incredibly interesting. And if you're talking about their history, the one thing that Michael always made a point to make sure to point out was that we're not just talking about a bunch of ragtag knights here,
Right.
you know, the poor knights of Christ. Like, this is all smoke and mirrors. The knights themselves are just like the soldiers of today. They're the guys that, you know, they believe in the cause. They're blinded by the light, or maybe they genuinely had reason to take up arms to defend Christendom at certain times or whatever, right? There's all that history. That's like the surface. But the real moving and shaking force behind the Templar organization is the Cistercian monastic wing. I guess it'd be the monks. They come from the Chaldean line. There's a whole thing with the John the Baptist, the cult of John the Baptist, and which sort of leads into some of the obsession in the more Masonic and skull and bone societies of the modern time. But so just to denominate, or just to distinguish between knights that are going into battle to fight battles that they're told to fight, and the people that organize and finance and work the backdoor deals to make those wars happen and to facilitate that. So that's the thing, is there's sort of like everything we've been talking about in the modern thing, like with our governments or the banking institutions or the military or anything like that, or even pharma. Not everybody's evil. Not everybody's in some big giant conspiracy, but there's a lot of cogs in the wheel. There's a lot of willing accomplices, and there's a lot of unwitting agents that are involved in something, because any nefarious activity or any criminality that's going on would be happening at the higher level. Right. Like it's a
completely
compartmentalized
thing. Exactly.
Exactly. So I look at the Templar story like that, and they're always told, like, I did a lot of stuff on History Channel about this, and I'd always try to bring the sort of dark side of the Templars up, and they never put that shit in the show. Of course, and I wonder why. I think I did one interview with them. It was with Ancient Aliens, and they were trying to make some connect. Or no, it wasn't even that. It was the Curse of Oak Island. There's that show, Curse of Oak Island, where they're trying to find the lost treasure of the Templars out in Nova Scotia. And while there is an interesting Templar connection to Canada and Nova Scotia, because it has to do with Scotland, Scotiabank, Scota, the whole line, right, for sure. But I told him, like, you're not going to find the treasure in Nova Scotia. I don't think that's where it would have been. And I don't think the Templar treasure was just wholly gold and rubies and diamonds and all this. I think most of it was the knowledge of how to set up these networks, the birth of spycraft, right? Where you have what we now call the CIA, typically the Templars and the Hospitallers, those types of chivalric orders were well involved in setting those types of organizations up in Jerusalem and in many of their crusades and many of their lands and whatnot. And so there's a crazy story to be told about this. You bring in the banking industry, you could go, well, the Templar were the first international bankers. They were the first, they were the ones that basically got all the kings of Europe in their pocket by way of loaning them money and doing the whole thing. So when you fast forward to modern history and you see these places like Switzerland that got untouched during the wars, and of course in Switzerland you have some of the head Masonic banks, the head insurance firms, Masonic institutions. A lot of
headquarters in Switzerland.
A lot of headquarters, Bank of International Settlements, the bank that owns the debt of Canada, for example. So like there's the whole thing, and then there's the connection with the Nazis and the Vatican, the rat lines, the New Templars, the Thule Society. So man, the minute you start diving into this and going just past that layer of, these are just some poor knights of Christ that were out there defending Western civilization from Islam. There was a necessary function for that. Don't get me wrong. It's not all completely erroneous, but when you're asking what was the original, I guess, commission or agenda behind the Templars, I think they're basically set up, knowingly or not at the time, they were set up as being the protectors of the realm, the protectors of the real empire, which is the empire behind the empire, the powers behind the throne, the movers and shakers that, yes, have done many great things to help build and preserve the West and all these different things and fight off our enemies. However, wherever humans gather, there is the heart of corruption, right? So there is this corruption, dark side that also needs to be talked about. And when we look at where we've got to, all the rot and the corruption that's taken place that we're now starting to see finally in 2025, the story doesn't just begin in 2020. It doesn't just begin after 9/11, and it definitely doesn't just begin after they shot JFK. It goes well back into the 10th and 11th centuries, and it's a fascinating occult history that definitely needs to be told. So there's my sort of intro to that.
That's a fantastic intro. You know, I mean, one of the most fascinating parts about this Templar story is that, like you said, and from my studies, I have to agree, you know, they were the first kind of, they acted as intelligence agents. I mean, as well as, you know, there was aspects of their society that were fighting, you know, against the barbaric Islamic raiders, and of course we know they were some of the first people to practice what could be considered modern day banking, you know, loaning notes, and for a while, as I understand it, they did have gold, and then they were like, you know what, we don't even need all this gold, we could just give them the notes, it's still worth, you know, no one's gonna know. And that's kind of how we ended up with our system today of like, oh, here, give us your gold, we'll give you these dollars. You know what? We don't need the gold. And anyway, but so but the fact that they trafficked in information, the fact that they, and when I say information, I don't mean like necessarily what we consider to be modern day intelligence, but I'm talking about ancient secret knowledge, you know, that had been suppressed for one reason or another. And I'm wondering, like, if you could explain specifically like how they might have managed to glean such esoteric knowledge from Middle Eastern and Eastern societies, because they seem to be like coveting and knowing a secret from what I gather from my studies, right? And I can't imagine that they were just handed them. So I'm wondering how, you know, have you ever unearthed how they came into them?
Yeah, the how, I mean, there's a lot of authors that speculate on this, and in a lot of this history, we get little shards of it here and there, right? Some of the letters, some of the history, and then you're trying to, what's disinformation, what really happened, what was embellished, you know, or just purely invented as a cover story. Like, this is where the issue is, right? But from what I can sort of gather from looking at a lot of different theories on this, is that there was definitely some liaisons and agreements and pacts that were formed by elements of the high levels of the Templar order with a lot of those Eastern mystical cults that were in the Middle East and the Far East even. And this sort of, to me, spoke to the reason why even the Nazis and some of these more modern groups also had a fascination with areas like Tibet and India and in the Middle East. Why, you know, under George Bush Sr., who was a Skull and Bones member, so he'd be sort of the lineage of that sort of Nazi Templar line, carrying out the attacks and invasions in the Middle East and bringing that whole thing. So these guys are continuing an age-old war that started back with these Templar orders. It probably goes back even further if you want to keep going, but just to kind of start there, it's interesting how there's a continuing war that's been going on between the East and the West. But what really got me was that, okay, there's all these wars going on and there seems to be these legitimate threats that are there, but there's these like secret handshaking deals going on between these elite members of both sides of these conflicts. Where have we heard this before? Right. Oh my God. Like, it's the whole story of many of the wars that we've watched, right? So there's a history to it that I think would fascinate people and bring some relevance to this subject, that we're not just going through some history here. This is something that's maybe getting to the heart of where things went wrong in the West in general. And it started by, I think, the fascination into the world of the occult and what that body of information is made up of. Everybody, you know, if you're talking to some Christian, they're going to say it's just all holy evil.
Right.
If you're talking, you know, and then, but you sit back and go, well, really, occult just means hidden knowledge, the knowledge that was held by the elite educated classes of people. And that would have been kind of going around in all these different cultures, right? So you'd have, you know, most people were uneducated. You know, how many people were mostly illiterate for the longest time? And there's only a select group of like priests and some nobles that knew how to read and write, right? So there's always been this advantage over the average person. And that's why now that we have all this ability to research and compare information and go back and look at it all, we're starting to find some interesting threads that we wouldn't have known back in those days. So just wanted to mention that. But just to get back to this thing, I think there was these different families. So the Templars were also financed and had some liaisons with Italian merchants like the Amalfi and whatnot. A lot of the piratical families. This is why you get that skull and crossbones, which is a Templar symbol, on the famous pirate flag. You know, Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, there's a hell of a lot more to that story, right? And then when you find out that through Templarism, which it became like its own, they're meant to be. First of all, they're meant to be a Christian sect that then got banished by the church, right? There was sort of a gang rivalry that took place.
Yeah,
right
about that.
But there's also this extreme, and then the whole John the Baptist obsession. Like, we're just this particular wing of Christianity, but the Templars were well into the occult world, and the occult body of knowledge is the ancient mystery tradition from Egypt and Samaria and the East, and like it's like the sum total of human knowledge pre, history,
which you could argue would date back to Atlantis, or Lemuria, even, depending on which one you think goes further.
Yeah, the whole pre-Diluvian civilizations. And I've done some good interviews with some people that have brought some new information about the whole Atlantis story out, which has always been regarded as myth and legend, but now we're finding a lot more validation for it. And by the way, just on that subject, Michael Tessarian, he had gone through the myths and legends of Ireland, the Celtic traditions, the Druids, the Bards, and found reams and reams of references to these lost lands and these lost places. Ignatius Donnelly, an Irish statesman, he wrote a book on this, talking about Atlantis and whatnot, and how Ireland was a part of that Lemurian, breakaway and all of that, or that the Azores in Portugal were basically the fallen remnants of the island that sunk beneath the ocean. So there's some interesting ways to look at that. But what that connects to, if that's true, is this sort of lost history of the West, that we look at civilization as something that started east to west, right? Civilization moved east to west. We had like Samaria, Egypt, Babylon, Rome, Greece, all the way up. But the missing chapter would be that, no, there was civilization well back before that in the West. And it went west to east, back to west was the true trajectory according to some of these other theories. And the Templar story is woven into this. And this is one of the secrets that I think is known at the top, is sort of the true history of not just Western civilization, but all civilization. It's sort of a collection of the lost knowledge, this sort of Ark of the Covenant, all this sort of this mythology of these lost treasures. I don't think they're just like objects that are lost. I think they're symbolic representations of lost knowledge and insight about human origins, about the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness. Also, don't forget the Templars were builders. They would build, they'd have entire towns and commission building these incredible Gothic cathedrals and castles and armaments and whatnot. So like, that's where you get the connection with the Masons. Yeah. A lot of Masons today, maybe in modern Masonry, they say, oh, there's nothing going, we're kind of buddy with the Templars, but we have our own little thing. And it's like, well, the top degrees in a lot of these Masonic orders are Templar degrees, which is always fascinating. And so, what's really behind it is, I think, just the old system of how to secure power and dominion and how to keep it and maintain it. And so there might be times where that might be something you want to do as a civilization or as a country to secure yourself and to provide for your people. So you could say, oh, it maybe all started out on the good foot, but then corruption comes in and elements come in. And I think one of the corruptive forces was actually a lot of the ideas that they pulled in from these Eastern mystical groups that they made these liaisons with during these crusades. And they brought a lot of this knowledge in. They started practicing these occult, esoteric practices. And I think actually that's where the first ideas of what we now call communism, fascism, totalitarianism, I think they were sort of perfected in these secret societies. And so not to just blame it all on the Templars, but just to say there was a history of where these ideas even came from and how they moved into the West, and then how they went through the Masonic lodges and then into the nobility and into the political houses and into our and it just sort of seeped in like a poison for hundreds of years. And so I think it's the knowledge of how to obtain and maintain power and dominion. And then number one piece of knowledge that they would have had is the nature of human consciousness, how it can be manipulated, how it can be guided. And this is where I pick up the trail in a modern time. I did this in my Cult of the Medics documentary. We get in a little bit into this history where I was looking at the Knights of Malta, which is a sort of another sort of brotherhood group. That was the Holy Order of the Vatican, really. When the Templars were disbanded, quote unquote, which they just took some of the main guys, executed them for show, and the rest were all you know, sent underground to Switzerland, Portugal, Canada, etc. And once they got rid of the Templars, they brought in any of the remaining Templars, their wealth and the knowledge that they had procured, brought them into the order of what was the Knights of, it was called the Knights Hospitaller, but was later the Order of St. John, and then the now the Knights of Malta. And those are the guys that are progenitors of both the pharmaceutical and medical industrial complex and all of your intelligence agencies in America, in Israel, in Europe. So you have like basically all the top founding members of the CIA, for example, every single one of them were card-carrying Knights of Malta, which is interesting, right? So you had that sort of Vatican-Moscow alliance. You can get into Baron Avril Manhattan's book on that. But yeah, the Knights of Malta were basically, to me, they're the exons. They're the, this is what Michael would call it, the exons, the lieutenants of the Templar order, which isn't an order of knights, really. And it's an order of these clerics, these occultists, and these guys who are sort of the keepers of the lost treasures, which are the keepers of the lost knowledge of essentially how to rule the thrones of the earth. Right. And then so much more, right? So they're also looking very much for the elixir of life. This is all embedded in their mythology. And there's some pretty interesting theories about what that really means when we talk about this thing going on with the missing children and all of that, that the whole thing about human trafficking, arms trafficking, you know, all these types of things. This isn't something new. No. This is something that goes well back into the history we're talking about here.
It goes way back. I mean, the complete exploitation in vile ways of children by, quote, nobility and royal bloodlines goes as far back as recorded history. You know, there's stories and evidence of that, which is just, I'll never understand in general how that became even a thing. But, you know, what fascinates me is that they on the surface at least made an enemy of organized religion, but it seems like that was very, very short-lived. They went underground and then eventually were kind of brought back and reinstituted, most likely for how much they could contribute to a power structure with their knowledge. But yet, you know, like a lot of what I read is indicative that there was a very much a belief system in place that was not, you know, you could not call it necessarily Christian. You certainly couldn't call it Catholic or any of those specific like that, you know, that kind of, those religions I think are for the plebe, you know, they're for the rabble, you know, but they seem to have an understanding that was, you know, they would kind of scoff at that. That was kind of the impression that I got from what I was reading, that they, you know, which makes sense if they came into true knowledge about, you know, this religion is like, you know, it's like, that's the drugs you give the regular people. Here's what's really going on, you know. But there's so many, it's such a web of information that, you know, to be able to strand it out, you know, would take you could take many lifetimes, I think, doing it. But
you could, and just to jump in real quick about that, the way I see it, because I've studied comparative religion, mythology my whole life. I've always been fascinated with it. It's one of my favorite subjects. And I studied that outside of looking at any of the secret society history or Templars or whatever. And then I found that later. And what I started to see was that what we're seeing, I call them the public square. The public square ideas about religion, history, politics. They're sort of like what they give the bread and circuses they throw off the elite round tables to the plebes, like you're saying. and we all think it's just the whole thing and the best thing ever, and we know everything when really you don't know. You know what you're told to know, right? And unless you take the time to dig in, and they don't even, I don't even think they mind if anybody does. They're just like, hey, if you are worthy, then the knowledge will be given to you. And I don't even think all of these elite level occultists or people that have this knowledge look down their nose at humanity. I don't think everybody's just got this evil perspective, but many do. Like that's the thing. And so the issue is the knowledge itself evil about the true order and history of these religions and these ideas and these orders and the way history went and the nature of consciousness. It's not that that's evil. It's that it's power. Knowledge is power. It's kind of like symbolism, which is another major element within the Templar orders, the Masonic tradition of the West, is symbolism, right? And this is also understood in the East. It might have even been where they picked it up or remembered it because it was also a lost art going all the way back to the Druids, right? But just the idea of symbolism itself, you get a lot of people that are amateurs in this field and they come in and they see symbols all over things and they don't really know what they're looking at. And maybe because they come from a particular view, they go, oh, that symbol upside down this or this kind of star, there's all evil. It's like, no, the symbolism comes from nature, right? Yeah. That's the origin of where it comes from. And so does all the religions, by the way. It's all stories and dramas of what nature is doing. And it's the external nature and the internal nature. That's the whole story of all these things. And what these cults are just different cults of interpretation of that mystery. And there's many competing schools. The Templars have their things. Some of the Masonic orders have their different things. The Jews have their things. The Christians have their things. Everybody's kind of got their slants. But I was always curious about, well, what do the people that rule the world believe?
Right.
Like, can we just say that they're all evil and wrong? Well, they are the ones ruling the world and have been ruling it for thousands of years, it seems. Right. And so they must know something we don't know. So it might not be that the knowledge itself is wrong or evil. It might be that it just depends on the hand that wields it. To what ends are you going to use and apply this knowledge? And maybe there once upon a time in these knightly chivalric orders was the code of humanitarian ethics and all of that. But those things change just like anything else, just like I was mentioning the CIA. We've got many scandals we could get into the history of the CIA, but that doesn't mean everybody and everything the CIA has ever done is wrong or evil or made up of evil people. So I always try to make that differentiation. But to me, it's just fascinating to study, to go, wow, the most powerful people in the world are all pretty much in agreement here on where a lot of this stuff comes from. Yeah. And then we can just debate, is it used for good? Is it evil? I think it's a mixed bag. But when we start to see one thing about the Templars is there was always this dream of a unified world. Yeah. Right. And this sort of like, let's unify and make brothers of men. Right. And this is the whole Masonic tradition as well. Fraternity, liberty, all of this. But it's also the tenets of the Communist Manifesto.
And it's also the Illuminati. Yeah.
Right. The Illuminati, the Illuminists, the Jacobins in France, the whole thing. These people they're using the humanitarian cause as a sort of carrot on a stick, because in the end you realize all the founders of these like people's movements and these revolutions, the French Revolution, all these they weren't just the common rabble. No. It was elite aristocrats that come from wealth and power that you can't even imagine that were the ones pushing for these things. Now, why would they do that? Right. Well, because I think they figured out the secrets that I think the Templars and these organizations and these cults know, which is the nature of human consciousness. When you know the nature of human consciousness and you understand the human psyche, especially when you're talking about the group mind or the public mind, right? You now know how to manipulate that. If you understand how powerful symbolism is, or powerful suggestion is, that could be something that you could use through high art and literature and poems and music and everything to uplift civilization, uplift humanity. But what if you are the type of person that is deeply riddled with maybe, I don't know, just a hatred of reality, self-hate, there's sort of a projection thing going on. And this is, I guess, the bedrock of someone that would lean towards the dark side of the force, right? It's someone that has that dark look upon themselves, so they cast that gaze on the world and they want to make the world in their image. What happens if that kind of psychopath gets a hold of this canon of knowledge? What does that do, right? So that's where I come in and say, hey, we're not looking at this black or white. We're trying to understand if a psychopathic mind or someone that adopts sort of an anti-life, anti-reality, anti-human mentality, they get a hold of this type of treasure trove of knowledge about how the human being works, how we build, how we destroy. That is just that those types of people will turn the world into their plaything.
Yep.
Right? Which is what I think we've seen and what we're seeing happen. And we see that rising up no matter what page of history you look at, and we can see it happening in our current time. So this means this is something that's a part of the human story. But we can't just cast all the blame on particular groups. But when we study these groups, we can learn some really important things. And I think that it will just give you the vision as to how vast and big this story is, and how relevant it is to our current situation with all these wars and the geopolitical Game of Thrones going on in our current time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, David Icke says this all the time, and he's absolutely spot on with it. You cannot rule billions of people without ruling them through their mind. You have to. Absolutely, unequivocally, or else you have no chance at it, because there's just way too many people, and that many people, we can literally do whatever we wanted, if we would realize what was happening and come together to change things. But of course, that's, again, we see the division and all the different tactics. They keep us in survival mode, just paying for everything at every second of the day, whatever you think that there's a literal tax and fee on everything. There's nothing that's exempt now. They're just constantly like, okay, keep them paying, keep them working, keep them in survival mode, keep a war lingering, keep a specter of an invisible threat, whatever it is today, because they can be traced throughout modern history, these invisible threats, that we're always supposed to be wary of. It's so relevant, and it's happening. And so it's just fascinating to begin to peek at the tip of the iceberg of the origins of the structures in place that are really causing all the strife on this planet right now. I think that it's safe to say, I look out and I see this world, and I'm aghast, and it's all due to these power structures that have been put in place to keep the vast majority of humans on this planet living, in a survival state. The less we have, the easier it is for us to listen and be dependent. And so everything to me seems like, how can we strip them of their sovereignty so it's easier for us to rule, and then you could get into like the fact that Bill Gates is 10-year-old with his parents getting tutorials on eugenics, and where the mindset comes from. It has to be indoctrinated into these families. They have to see themselves as aloof, because how else do you allow the suffering, and when there's a wide variety of solutions that you could, with your power, put into play, but you're not supposed to. You're not, you have to realize that this is the way to keep balance, right? It's like fucking Thanos from Avengers. He thinks he's doing the right thing too. And it's like, goes to what you said about symbology, and people are like, oh, that's the sign of people don't understand all those things come from someplace. Yeah. I was an actor for 20 years, and good actors learn that when you get cast as the bad guy, you don't fucking play the bad guy. You don't get caught twisting your mustache. A bad guy thinks he's doing good. You know what I mean? That's right. Bad guys believe they're doing good. They just happen to be fucking stepping on people's throats and hurting people in the process. But hey, that's the price for the goodness they're doing. So like the mindset, people just imagine, and I'm sure there are exceptions. There are people out there who are truly psychopathic and ruthless and are, know they're doing terrible things and just don't care. That's what they're about. But I think that's probably the exception. Most of these people in their twisted mind think that what they're doing is necessary. It's a necessary evil, so to speak. So I don't know. I just those are my thoughts on a lot of what you said. But speaking of all these different power structures, and so there's a lot of people believe that the Templars discovered something really extraordinary beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. and I know that you've done some research into this. And I was wondering if you could expand on what you believe they found there and how it ties to the, the modern day mystical traditions that are still obviously very prominent in like the Kabbalah or even some of the ancient Eastern esoteric systems.
Yeah, to get into specifically what they found, it's anybody's guess. It's been very mythologized, right? Especially in the writings and even in their own writings. That's why I just feel like it's very safe to say that maybe they found some alien artifact or something. I don't know, but the thing is they may have found something from lost time. They may have found relics from lost civilizations. But what would that be? Would they just find some goblets? They just find some treasures? Like, okay, big deal. That kind of shit's been dug up all over the place. What would be something that would be powerful enough that would kick off the entire history, the whole thing of the order? It would be the mythology of the order. It would be the thing that everybody thinks about. And I've heard some good cases to be made that Solomon's Temple is mostly metaphorical. And if we think metaphor, don't mistake me for saying that it's not real. We think remember, we was talking about the secrets of human consciousness. I think that's really what we're talking about. Is that there's an old joke that I was told as a kid. They would say, "Well, where is Solomon's Temple?" On the side of his head. It's just like a stupid joke we used to tell. But I'm like, well, wait a minute, Solomon's Temple. Well, what if they're talking about the architecture of human consciousness, right? And maybe they found the seat of the soul. Maybe they found the Eye of Ra. Maybe they found the portal to, the spiritual realms or something like that by way of the practice of consciousness, which means these guys are into the world of the occult. They're into, the idea of projecting consciousness, the getting out of body, communicating with spirits and entities and whatnot. And this is something that's been, I was looking into just cults in general. I just got a fascination with it because I was wondering, like, what was all these freaky cults? Why are we so messed up? Like, what's going on? And why are there so many cult leaders? And more particularly, why is there so many cult followers? Like, because none of these cults would have got away with anything had they didn't have a bunch of fans, cheering them on the whole time. So that's interesting. And I look at the Templars as a particular cult. And so they're trying to discover what? Well, they're trying to discover the magic, right? What's the magic? Is it like Mickey Mouse shit where they're waving wands and stuff? Or is the real magic, what do magicians do on stages? They bamboozle the masses. Right. They make you think they're doing something superhuman when they're not really doing that. Right. Isn't that what these Illuminati roundtables have done to the world? Hey, we're this big specter. We're so powerful, and we're like basically gods roaming the earth. Right. We control everything. We're behind every corner and under every bed. Like that whole thing. When really, they're just a bunch of little betas shivering in a castle somewhere, using occult knowledge to bamboozle the minds of your to bamboozle your right brain and pull you into a mythological way of thinking. So if you know that secret, maybe that's the kind of shit they started to discover with the lost keys of Solomon or whatever. I mean, this is just speculation, but everybody's got their, they get into the particular of what object they found or what treasure they found or what map and they've never found it. And I just kind of went, well, these guys are occultists. And in the world of the occult, they work mainly off of metaphor and symbolism. So if we understand that, then when they're writing and talking about what they've discovered and what's the treasure of all these treasures, don't take them literally. Right. Just like when you read the Bible or any of these other books, you're taking it literally because you're left brain dominant, because you've been raised to be left brain dominant. When the whole thing was meant to be a poetic, symbolic, metaphorical exercise with history laid into it. Don't get me wrong. Like all movies you watch are going to have historical references in it and whatnot, and certain characters. But then those characters are embellished and they're given these particular roles that are very consistent. And you know that because the numbers are consistent. Like there's 12, always the 12 round table knights, the 12 disciples, the 12 houses of Israel, the 12, 12, 12. Well, what's that? Now we're getting into numerology. Yeah. Another Eastern mystical, and well, it has a Western lineage as well. And so these are the types of practices. But do they mean what they're saying on the exoteric level? Is that what they're talking about? I mean, the surface level? Or what's the whole thing about, no, you got to go behind the veil if you want to know the truth of wisdom. You want to go through, you got to go into Aladdin's cave and you must be worthy to receive the truth. This kind of shit it all comes from this Templar Masonic tradition. Yeah. And so that to me tells me that even if there were these holy relics found, or these lost pieces of history, or these alien artifacts, or whatever you want to call it, sure, I'm sure there's got that stuff. I think that stuff's cool to think about as well. But I think the main key of what was discovered was the motivational drives of the human being.
Yeah.
And when you find that and how consciousness works, now you've got a plaything, and now you can be the magician on the stage, bamboozling the masses and making something seem like it's one thing when really it's another.
And
why would you do that?
Yeah.
To gain power and dominion. That's been the objective, you know?
And you can leverage that with every governing body and power throughout the ages. What you know,
That's
there's
right.
no government that you can't infiltrate with that kind of knowledge, and you're just whispering in people's ears, and all of a sudden, you know, you're the right hand person of the king, the, you know, whatever the monarch is of that time. It's just, and there's certainly an echo and a shadow of that. We can see it throughout modern political systems. You know, we see these same families that are just completely up to their ears in legacy secret society, skull and bones, you know, shit. Always in the right hand of the person in charge, you know, or I should say the puppet in charge. But, you know, it's just fascinating. And as far as religion and metaphors go, like I grew out of Catholicism long ago. No offense to any Catholics listening, but, you know, like they say, take this body and eat it, and take this blood and drink it. And nobody bats an eye, because it's obviously it's a metaphor. But they read Genesis and they're like, no, this really happened. You know, like crazy. I'm so fucking confused. I don't understand how you take any of it at face value. There's certainly wisdom to be mined from it, at least some of the books. But I think a lot of it is, people have it so twisted and confused, and it's like a pacifier, you know, as opposed to like you trying to explore the mysteries of this life. Don't bother, suck on this, you know. It's like that's religion to me anyway. I'm not very fond of it in general. I think it's the cause of a massive amount of war and division. I think that's what it was a vehicle for, you know. It's a poison pill.
And it didn't have to be that way, Faust. That's the thing. And I'm with you. Like, it's become that. But there would be writers that would tell you, like, if you read people like Alvin Boy Kuhn or Gerald Massey or Schwaller Delubich or some of these other writers, what they tried to do was go in and just take apart the dogma and tell people, you've been educated by a priesthood, okay? You weren't reading you weren't being educated by the Holy Writ the way you thought you were, because it's been fractured, mistranslated. There's pieces missing. There's books missing. There's context missing, right? Context is huge.
Edited.
If you're reading a story about Jonah and the whale, or Arthur and his knights, or any of these stories, and you're like, wow, like, where's the documentary of that? Like, that's got to be on the History Channel. That actually happened. And it's like, yeah, well, if that happened or not, I don't think it did. The truth about the story is, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What is it conveying to you? Like, did Mowgli and the Jungle Book story actually happen?
Yeah.
And does it matter? Or what matters is, what's the moral story that's behind it, right?
Yeah.
So people, it's like, I often describe it like this, the way Bruce Lee used to talk about that whole finger pointing to the moon thing. He's like, you keep pointing the finger at the moon, don't focus on your finger, or you're going to miss the moon. You're going to miss all the heavenly glory of what you're pointing at. That's where they've got you in a lot of these religions. So what you do is you can go through the Bible, the Torah, the Hadith, the Quran, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You can go through these things. And when you have the keys of decipherment about what's being told, and the fact that you're just reading these little clippings from all over the world of what was once, I believe, a unified body of knowledge of what our ancestors tried to bequeath to us as, here is how you build a peaceful, thriving civilization.
Yeah.
Here's the keys. Here's how you build a healthy body and mind. Here's how you actually communicate with the divine, right? The kingdom of heaven is within, right? This whole thing, this is the story our ancestors tried to tell us. And then these warped priesthoods came in, and they either took this literally themselves and then created whole dogmas out of it because they're traumatized from their history, or they knew that this is what it was. And they're like, well, let's give the Sunday school kindergarten version of Peppa Pig version to the masses. And then for us, the elites, we're the worthy ones. We're the vicars of the gods. We will be the gardeners of civilization. So we'll have the keys of knowledge, and we'll never let the human race know about it. And then you get these psychopaths, and they go, hey, this is the perfect recipe for us to, gain all the power and build the trillions and do the whole thing. So that to me is the story. So I don't throw religion out. I actually take a magnifying glass and I go in and go, wait a minute. Aren't we kind of all telling the same story from different angles here? The mystery of nature, the mystery of time and being and consciousness and life and death and all of this. Like, isn't it mostly just allegorical tales of what the sun is doing, what the nature's doing, what the stars are doing, how the cycles are working, and that they were doing a correlation between what was going on in nature and what was going on internally in your mind and in your being? So that could be the premise of all these religions. And when you get to the core of them, you'll see them there. Every religion has a sort of esoteric version, right? Like Islam has the Sufis, right? Judaism has the Kabbalists. Christianity even has occult or esoteric Christianity. A lot of Christians don't know about. Yeah. And there's a whole thing of like this, like other side. That's the stuff I'm talking about. That's what's been held by these elite masters for centuries. And so to wake up to it is to not throw it out, but to realize to just put it in its right place, in its right context. And suddenly, yes, now you can gain wisdom from it. And then you're free to explore instead of becoming dogmatic and tunnel visioned. You're free to explore and realize, hey, we're looking here at the sum total of human knowledge that's been collected for thousands of years. You could still go through all those archives of the Templars and the lost keys of Solomon and the whole thing and come out and go, yeah, it's a bunch of bollocks, moving on. Right. Like, you could do that. But I think that would be a mistake. I think there's some like life-changing, civilization-changing information that's been held back from us. And then the other aspect I wanted to point out when we're talking about these guys that have all this power, what if we find out that they operate off of natural law principles at the top, and that what they need to do is not just go in and steal the thrones of power, which is what the sort of lower level tries to do, but the higher level that I'm talking about, they actually get manufactured consent from all of us. And that's the way they do it. It's the devil's bargain, right? It's, I'll give you power if you give me fealty, get on your knees or whatever, right? Way. Yeah. And that's how they've done it, is they've gotten us to vote them in, cheer for them, support them, fight for them in their wars, die for them in their wars, become experimental guinea pigs for their experiments. And we have willingly gone in, and it's because we were blinded by the light. Yep. And even though they know that at the top and they're dark and evil, they're looking at it like, yeah, but you signed the dotted line. Right. You were ignorant. You didn't understand what the game was that you were playing before you decided to play it. Your responsibility. So what if we find out that the real law is not that these evil sorcerers broke the law and are all against humanity? What if we willingly gave them the keys of dominion? We gave them the thrones of power. And the reason I came to this conclusion is because of my study of cults, as I was saying, was that I couldn't just blame Jim Jones and Walter Applewhite and Robert de Grimston and all these cult leaders or Maria Abramovich. You can't just blame them. No. They have the people.
Katy Perry happily went with Maria into the woods.
That's it. We like, the cult doesn't have a business if they don't have followers. So just remember that. And what that does is it also gives you the way out. It tells you, hey, I don't have to sign up for this cult bullshit. Right. I don't have to just like put my mind on a platter and say, hey, can you do my thinking for me? I don't have to do that. I can pursue this path of freedom. And the greatest thinkers and sages, and many of them did come from these Illuminati groups, by the way. They weren't all evil. Right. We're trying to warn humanity about this before things got really out of hand. And so I go to those writers and stay close to those genius thinkers. And then you just put it all together and you realize, hey, the game is you can leave the matrix anytime you want. Right. It's a psychological thing. It's an attitudinal thing. And yeah, there's definitely things we don't have control over. Like, are we all going to be living in a totalitarian dystopia run by, who knows? But even in that scenario, we've got great minds that have proven you can still be the freest person walking on the earth, even if you're in a gulag. It's an attitude shift. And I think when you're in that vibration, that's when the higher forces come to aid you.
That's right. I agree 100%, you know, and I'm looking forward to the day when this human race snaps the fuck out of it, maybe slaps himself in the face a few times and realizes what a great big hoodwink has been pulled, you know, because we have given away our, let's be frank. We've given away our sovereignty as a collective species to these authoritative figures, which have no true authority. No, like no man has the authority to rule over another man or dictate laws to him, you know, and but we're raised with the idea that of course there's authority. That's never been in question. You know, we're sent to school to submit to authority, and you know, through our parents, we learn that there has to be an authority because our parents keep us alive, right? But it's just, it's such a mind fuck. And I really think, you know, people are always like, just wait for Jesus to come back. I'm like, I'm not like, you wait for Jesus to come back, okay? Like, we need to do something.
He already came back and he went, get me the hell out of this motherfucker. I'm like, so, no, but
we're all just going to wait for Jesus, but we're not going to do anything. Like, I'm like, why don't we do something in the meantime? We can wait for Jesus, but let's also take action here and try and shift things for the better while we wait. What do you say? You know, people are, I mean,
hey, the Lord helps those who help themselves.
That's
apparently,
right. That's
right.
right.
And one thing I was going to say on what you're mentioning is there's that brilliant statement from Percy Shelley, the poet, when he said, you know, government of itself will decay when all men are good and wise. Right. This is what I say to the sort of anarchists. I say, look, okay, I get it. You know, philosophically, I see what you're talking about, but we're missing out on the current state, the adolescent state, the arrested development state of the vast majority of human beings walking around the planet. And if you do remove all authority and all structure and all governance, you know, just go visit Haiti and you'll see what kind of situation we're dealing with. Go look at what it was like in the Middle Ages, where you're just unprotected at all times. So this is the interesting quagmire that we're in. Humans need leadership. We need guidance, and we need a rule of law, and we need some sort of system of governing human affairs.
Yeah.
And I think that we've tried many different systems of that, and some were better than others. I definitely think that the West perfected it to the best degree possible to allow for the most freedom, even though it became very much infiltrated and degraded over time.
Right.
But even that said, the onus comes down to every individual to understand that what was that brilliant wisdom that he said? He didn't just say government of itself should just decay and we should all just decay the government.
Right.
Yeah, that's the argument of the communists and the Jacobins, by the way, just so you know. What they want to do is rout out that and replace it with something even worse, right? And that just seems to be the pattern of humanity. We get rid of one evil and then we put a worse one in charge. It's just, I don't know what happens. So you got to go, all right, so the other statement was, when all men are good and wise, like we were saying, when humanity could wake the fuck up.
Right.
Yeah. Don't hold your breath.
Yeah.
Right. So then how do you, I mean, maybe one moment, maybe enough disclosure of truth that's been hidden will precipitate a bigger awakening. I'm always open to that. And I see it happening on certain levels right now. I think we're in an amazing period for this. I'm not a black-pilled person at all. Okay. But I still sit back and go, you always have to take the worst case scenario and the human track record into account. Okay. Human track record is, we don't want freedom. We want freedom from freedom. Right. That's the real track record of humanity. And we can't just blame the Illuminatis and the Knights Templars and all the evils for that. There was a deal made with the devil on behalf of humanity. Let's just put it like that. Yeah. So that means the only thing you person listening to this can do to achieve that level of freedom that I know your soul is dreaming of is to start with yourself. That's the only thing you can do. And that's really, I think, another message from these lost mystery traditions and even the greatest parts of religion were to tell you, like even when you have the message of the Christ in the book, when he's like, everything I can do, you can do in greater. Right. See ya. I'm out of here. Right. I don't know where they lost that bit of him basically telling you, oh, by the way, the punchline of the entire story was that you are also endowed with divinity and light and God and heaven, right? Right. Go forth, right? We lost that bit. So that means that each and every one of us is going to have to, in our own right, figure out what that is for us. What does that look like for us? Are we going to be in victim consciousness because we're learning that powerful forces are moving and shaking the world around us? Right. I don't think that should be a surprise to anybody. It's always been so. It's probably always going to be. Maybe that's what this Earth experiment is. Maybe that's what this realm is. It's like, it's a soul maturation. If you go to like a a mystical interpretation of the fact that maybe your soul comes to certain life cycles for particular experiences that move the soul to the next level. I don't know. But these occultists seem to think that that's the case.
Yep.
And these are the guys that rule the world. So I think that's really interesting. And it makes you wonder that maybe you've had more power over your life than you knew. Maybe the biggest lie is that there's someone controlling everything going on and that you have no power.
That's right.
And maybe they need you to buy into that lie in order to keep their power. Maybe it's that simple. And so it would be nice if we could just get everybody to realize that and then overturn the Dark Lords and put good, moral men and women in power.
That would be our best shot at it.
Yeah, take our best shot. And we should. And that'd be a worthy cause. And I would ride into the Black Gates with anybody that wants to do that.
I would as well.
In the meantime, what are you going to do? Sit around and get depressed about the fact that, a bunch of assholes, psychopathic pedophiles are ruling the world?
Yeah.
Well, you have to take dominion over your own mind.
That's right.
So that it's not under their dominion anymore. It's the same if you want to get out of a cult, if you want to leave Scientology, you're going to have to get rid of all that garbage, and you're going to have to find your own sense of selfhood and meaning in the world that isn't going to rely on that cult to give you a prescription for life. And so,
and then evade those
freedom
bastards
is an inside job. It's an attitude shift in the end. It's not something that you're going to lead a revolution like in Russia and overthrow the lords only to install a genocidal government.
Right.
We can't be doing that broken record either,
No, absolutely. And, you just brought up some incredible, powerful points that, I tend to harp about, and that is the fact that, there's good news and bad news. The good news is no one's coming to save you. And the bad news is no one's coming to save you. So, you're going to have to look within to save yourself. And that's going to probably involve a lot of unlearning, a lot of deprogramming. If you want to truly achieve a sense of freedom, it is going to begin in your heart and your mind. And it's not going to come from an external validation. It's going to come from your, desire to still your mind and go within and start to explore some of the greater mysteries of this existence without someone feeding you and telling you exactly what you should or shouldn't be experiencing and thinking. And I just think so many people are disempowered because we don't teach this. We don't teach this to our children. We don't, we teach them, nonsense history and other
memorize
things that they're never going to use in any relevant way in their life. So it's just, it's like we were down this dark road, but at the same time, I'm like you. I also see the potential for a lot of change as more, because it's a cat and mouse game. David, what they do one thing and they couldn't have anticipated the response and the amount of knowledge that people were going to garner being locked down during the 2020 debacle. 2021. If you lived in New York City, it was it had extended over a year. Like I lived there. And the amount of knowledge people came into about the truth of things, they could not have anticipated that. I don't know what they thought everyone was doing. They're like, quick, make Pornhub free. I was like, too late, motherfuckers. Everyone's already knee deep in the shit now. People are throwing up because they're on to you.
Everybody knows who Klaus Schwab is now.
Right.
What are we going to do?
That's right. So, it's, and I love that. That gives me hope for the human spirit, our willingness to get back up, learn and try and do better. They'll never take that away. And there's no system they can put in place that's going to eradicate that, and so we got that going for us. But so that's good. Speaking of the religions, and we got a new pope, and I wanted to ask you a little bit with our remaining time. The Vatican and the Pope and these institutions they're so fascinating to so many people because people know that there's so much more to them. People know that the Pope is he's the figurehead, but what's going on at the Vatican? It's and how is the Vatican related? Then we get into DC and London, and what is with those that trifecta, of rule. But my question is, the Vatican's played in both the suppression and as historically, the catalyst for them going underground, but also the possible continuation of the Templars' esoteric knowledge. And so, like, my question is, has the Vatican really tried to take the knowledge for themselves and control it, or have they become part of the same corrupted system over time, which is what it seems to me?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would say that when we see the disputes between, say, the Templar Order and the Vatican, or the battle between the Protestants and the Catholics, right? I think that's still public square. I think there's some good indications for it. We'd have to do a whole thing to unpack all that, but just, think of that as public square information that, on the surface, there's these little rivalries. It's kind of like the rivalry between the Nazis and the communists, right? Yeah. When we find out, oh, wait, they all come from the same, it's all the same Gatorade, it's just different flavors. And they're saying my flavor is better than your flavor. And we're just two gangs fighting over the same territory, really, right? So there's the surface level, and then there's the occult level, the hidden upper high table level. And I think at the high table level with the Vatican and the Templars, it's all the same oat bag now, at least now. Maybe through time, there has been like a lot of back and forth. Maybe certain popes or certain cardinals or people within the Vatican were actively trying to fight against this. This is the testimony we get from, Father Chiniquy, where some of these great Malachi Martin, where they talk about how basically the Vatican got infiltrated by Satanists, right? Even today you have Archbishop Vigano, who's been out there talking all the stuff about the New World Order, the Great Reset, the pandemic fraud, the whole thing. So we've had insiders from the Vatican for centuries, actually, beyond just what we've got in the modern time. There's been insiders have been writing about how that thing got infiltrated by dark forces a long time ago. So now, does that implicate every Catholic? No, it doesn't. Does that implicate every Jesuit or cardinal working in the Vatican? No, it's compartmentalized, just like Pfizer or anything else, right? So, but what we're talking about is a steering committee level, where we're talking about a pedophilic eunuch cult. Eunuch meaning snip, snip, right? Which means we're talking about something that has a lot of female symbolism in it, which is really interesting. And this gets into we've been talking about a lot of this lately on the Unslaved podcast, Michael's thesis on the female cults, that there are particular female cults, witch covens and elite royal princesses, houses, the House of Orange and some of these houses, Queen Catherine, Queen Mary, all these queens. And there's this lineage in that cult. There's even, when you have the Knights of Malta, you also have the Dames of Malta. Anybody know about the Dames, right? The Knights and the Dames. You see these female leaders coming in, like Ursula in the EU, and, these people, Chrystia Freeland in Canada, right? Michelle Obama was a question
Mexican
mark. All these elites. And then you get into Hollywood and you have these super mega stars and what they've produced. And the symbolism that's in there alone in your Lady Gaga videos and Super Bowl halftime shows and Madonna's music videos and the language and the blood, the soaked in blood, the vampirus, the whole symbol, the sirens, the mermaids. Where does that shit come from? The Templars know. The Vatican knows. The secret societies know. The Satanists know. So there might be a whole thing where there's like, that's where the reason I call it Game of Thrones is not because we're dealing with like Russia and America and I'm talking above that these people are globalists. They don't give a shit about countries and all that. Those are puppets for them. This is warfare happening at the highest level between competing cults who all are seeking power. So they don't have humanity in mind. They don't have anything in mind other than just getting the seats of power. And they'll cut each other's throats to do it. And on a different day, they'll shake hands. So that's why in history, I've always trying to reconcile like these breakaways and these, like it might have very well been that the Vatican wanted to ban the Templars because the Templars were becoming too powerful in their own right and were too much of a threat to all of Christendom. And they were dabbling in this Eastern occultism. So they went, we got to cut that off. But they didn't do that because they're like these moral, pious Christians.
It's competition.
They're like, we want that shit. We want that
United
knowledge
States
and that
government
wealth
and the
for
war on
ourselves.
drugs. It's like
Exactly. Right. So, one thing leads to another. The faces of these mafias change and morph over time. They amalgamate. There's cross-pollination. And then suddenly now we have these modern organizations. And now it's not so much about the Vatican in Rome, although I'd love to know what's buried under the 50 miles of tunnels there and shit.
Yeah.
I think that some of these are decoration, right? Like the King Charles, like he's not a fucking king,
No.
okay? He just sits there and does, like, we're talking like
Fuck's that guy doing?
behind the throne, okay?
Yeah.
There's a whole other infrastructure that most people don't know about. And I'm shocked to find out that people would be surprised to hear this, knowing what we know about the royalty and how it works and the way government works and history. It's not what you think, right, on the surface.
No.
So when we look at the Vatican, you know, Baron Avro Manhattan, he swore, and he was an insider. He was a Knight of Malta. He was at the top. He was a baron. He knew a lot of this stuff, and he exposed it. He was a whistleblower. And he wrote a book called Vatican Billions, which I recommend everybody reads, because the Vatican also has that sort of, we're just the poor Knights of Christ. They kind of stole that from the Templars. We're just here serving the poor. Donations? Yeah, just like the Red Cross. Yeah, we're just here to get your blood and help those people that need blood and go around the world. And yeah, we're probably a slush fund for a bunch of human trafficking, but don't worry about that. We're also harvesting your blood and selling 80% of the blood plasma you donate to pharma so they can make drugs.
And we got a
vaccines.
few $1 trillion salted, but donations.
But please donate here. We're the poor knights, the Salvation Army. We're just collecting, for the poor and needy. And so they put this like, we're here for the poor and needy. Right. So does the UN. We're here for the poor countries. Yeah, but it's run by
peace.
We want world peace. Yeah, you want world peace, all right, with less humans.
Yeah.
That's peace, right? Less humans that are, and the ones surviving are all members of your cult. Yeah, I'm sure you would want that. That sounds very peaceful. So, you just got to look at this. And if you get into the Vatican, you got to get into the history of the Jesuit order.
Yeah.
We've done plenty on this. And so you got the Jesuits, that's the College of Cardinals. And then you see this new pope.
Yeah.
Does anybody know about, like, there's the white pope, there's the gray pope, there's the black pope. And we're not talking about skin color here. We're talking about degrees, Masonic degrees. I think was it James Parton, one of the historians, had said he looked up through all the ranks of Freemasonry. He went through the whole Freemasonic, all the rites and rituals. And to him, he's like, if I get to the tip top of world Freemasonry post, 1800s, I'm talking about the superior order of the Vatican, the Jesuits. Like, that's what he pinned it down to, was that at the top of the Masonic orders and the Templar orders is the church, right?
Right.
Now, Tessarian might disagree by saying, well, it's crown and gown that runs the show. So they're just like the two cross keys. It's crown and gown, meaning you got the royals, and then you got the gowns, which would be the clergy and the cardinals, right? And that there's a sort of he calls it like a tassel to purse relationship between those that fund and finance. Because you remember the European nobles were very land rich, but they were poor money wise. They didn't have like cash, liquid cash. So they just had all these like estates and lands, but they were kind of broke when it came to regular whatever. So they found the best guys to deal with the banking. They learned that from the Templars. They got some Jewish bankers in there who were they had their own thing of surviving all the things. And they were just like, yeah, let's do the job. And it's all compartmentalized. And so these guys have run these empires in this manner for a long time, where now they have both the land and the estates, and they also have the financial game clamped down. And they learned that from what the Templars learned about how to do that. Yeah. And they use war as one of the main funding mechanisms through the military-industrial complex.
Still doing it, still using
it.
And
then when I pulled all the layer behind the medical-industrial complex with the Knights Hospitaller and the whole thing, I went, oh shit. That makes the military-industrial complex look a little small compared to what these guys have generated, right?
Right.
So, you find this, you keep peeling back the layers, and you find the same institutions, organizations, funding houses behind a lot of it. And it makes you wonder, is there then a grand agenda going on for the last, however many hundreds of years to, I boil it down to, I think the agenda is to completely dismantle the West.
Yeah.
And bring everybody back to that sort of serfdom medieval level again by introducing socialism, communism, fascism, these kind of things into the politics, and then deflating the currency, bringing everybody down,
get rid of the nation,
creating the one ring of power. Because even Bertrand Russell, who was big time with the Royal Society in England there, and he spoke openly about eugenics and things like that. And he was saying that we need to achieve world socialism. And in order to achieve world socialism, we need the population numbers reduced.
Yeah.
So then you pass that over to the desk of the Club of Rome, who writes up the whole way of doing it, right? Club of Rome. What are we talking? Vatican, Rome, the Roman Empire, the 3 city-states, right? And they come in and they go, oh, well, here's the way you do it. Here's how you take it over. You talk about the climate change
That's
thing.
right.
And humans are breathing and they're
atmospheric event.
Yeah. You know? And we gotta use
everyone
that as
will
our
rally
way.
behind that cause because no one wants the planet to be destroyed. Right.
But these guys are the Pope. These are the religious guys. They know how to use virtue as the sales pitch.
Yep.
They are the wolves in sheep's clothing. So what do? They turn your virtues against you and they blind you with the light. And they go, hey, we're just here for the little guy. Yeah. Support your local communist enclave. We're just here to save the planet. Make sure to go and donate to Greta Thunberg's cause that, whatever. We just, on and on we could go. And they get us to manufacture our consent for what they're doing.
Yep.
And then you find out, oh, wait, right. There's a depopulation agenda. There's a world control agenda. They want a world parliament, a world government, which means they have to remove national sovereignty, which means they have to remove the whole idea of individual sovereignty. Yep. Because these guys, these Templars, these Jesuits, these priesthoods, they dream of the good old days when humans were a bunch of Neanderthal level IQ. We were just a bunch of serfs that were easier to push around and rule with crown and gown. And now when we had this like Enlightenment period and we had this industry and we had this like concept of you're an individual endowed with rights from your creator and free speech and free thought and free communication and let's get free press, like that, it served them for a while, but then we ran with it a little bit too much. And they're like, okay, we can't do this shit anymore. Freedom has to go.
Right.
So the orders came from the top. We're getting rid of freedom. We're getting rid of the thing, which means we have to demolish the West piece by piece.
Right.
Well, who's the best for that job? Oh, right. The communists and the fascists. They've always been up for this. So let's get them marching. Oh, and Islam is also a major weapon we could use. Oh, and what's the other one? Let's get all the mothers to reject motherhood and join the workforce.
Right.
And let's use weaponized feminism to hit that and separate the family units. Yep. Let's put all these endocrine disruptors and testosterone reducing heavy metals in the foods and the water and the beers and everything. And let's get the men fat, lazy, and stupid so that there's no uprising.
And we take care of the population problem by destroying the sperm count.
Exactly.
Don't tell anyone. 40 years.
And don't tell. It's a big secret. We're kind of telling you, but like anybody that points it out, you're just a conspiracy theorist, and we'll send our guys after you. So that's kind of a generalized view of looking at this idea of what's been going on. Is that there's what's presented to us on the surface by these organizations, and then there's what they actually do, and then there's just the evidence of what's going on right now.
Yeah.
Right? There's the evidence of what we all learned and witnessed during the lockdowns, which I think was just a massive beta test, right, for the system. Now, thank goodness that we have people that are resisting this, not just the average Joe that's waking up. I think this waking up process is universal across the world, where it's sort of an effect of our time. And maybe there's many reasons we could get into as to why it's happening. Maybe it's just because the temperature is getting turned up and it's inspiring the awakening. Right. I don't know. Maybe it's because the planet's aligning. I don't know. But either way, here we are. And I think the waking up process is also happening behind the doors of these secret organizations, in these intelligence networks, in these government agencies. And people are starting to push back and reject that system that was being installed. And so I think we're in the time where humanity is starting to wake up and fight back against this, which is why we're seeing them step on the gas pedal so hard, and they don't mind coming out of the closet anymore. They're kind of just coming out with the full agenda now.
Brazen,
It's very brazen because there's no option. They have to. And they would have rather waited a lot longer, I think, because these guys are Fabians. They prefer the long, slow, take it easy, don't ruffle anybody's feathers, make sure the prey animal isn't alerted to the predator in the grass, right? They had to abandon that because something shifted. And that's right. I think there's a reason for it. So that's the good news. And I think that if everybody listening just sort of takes the time, you don't need to go to the depth of research that maybe you or I have done on this to see this, but just kind of look beyond the surface, even for 5 minutes, of everything that you're looking at, and really dive in and find that, man, there's brilliant people that have already got into this and exposed it. And we can learn a lot more about the context of the times by looking at the history of some of these fascinating subjects we talked about today.
I think it's so important, man. And that's why I'm thrilled that you took some time to come on this show with me. I'm very passionate about trying to bring people a truer version of history, because, you know, if you're confused about who you've been, then you don't have a lot of incentive to change if you have this notion that you've been so fucking great, you know. But when you find out, wait a minute, I've been the bad guy. I've been the one that's been breaking shit and fucking thinking, I don't want to keep doing that. So then you have incentive to change. And I feel like, you know, because our history has been so falsified and so fabricated that most people don't, I mean, you know, there are still, most Americans think that we're like that. We're the fucking hero. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, study history, real history, not the stuff they teach you in school. You know, we've been the bad guy for a while, you know. I mean, good guys don't hang out with Stalin, period. I mean, like, you just don't throw your arms around somebody who's mass murdered, you know, tens of millions of people and think that, well, you know, just this once, it's okay. It's like, no, there's a compromise there that is not able to be reconciled. So thank you so much for coming on. First of all, it was an awesome amount of information, a lot of awesome references, a lot of things for people to think about. Tell everyone, David, where they can keep up with you, where they can find you, you know, and you know, all the good stuff.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Faust. A fascinating subject, man. I'm glad you brought this up. I had to kind of look up and refresh my memory on a few things, but it's interesting stuff. And I just hope at least we pique some curiosity and people will go look into it. If they want to find my work, you can get me at unslaved.com. I work with Michael Tessarian on that project. We're also now on Substack. You can find Unslaved on Substack. And then my personal work, I call it Truth Warrior. That's my podcast. You can get me on iTunes, Spotify.
Also
I'm on
on
X,
Substack.
and I'm also on Substack's my main hub now. It's just easier.
Yeah, I follow you there,
There's a lot of free stuff on there, and then I do have some paid content, which is where I take like 18 books off my shelf and we just kind of mix and match and go through and try to study these subjects in detail.
Nice.
And so I do long form presentations on all this stuff over there. I recently did one on the occult history of communism.
Oh, cool.
I did one on, I even get into the subject of religion. So I did one called Children of Light.
I'm going to bump up my subscription to you, man. I want in on all this info, dude.
Seriously,
thank you.
Well,
yeah.
And it's just a better way. So I don't have to like do ads and all that stuff for my show. So it's just like you either get it long form or you can get I do smaller short form versions of things that people can get access for free. And my main website is dwtruthwarrior.com. That leads you everywhere. And I definitely want to point out the documentary series that I made. It's a homemade thing that I did during the lockdowns. This was my artistic therapy called Cult of the Medics. You can get it for free on my Substack. There's 10 chapters there. Nice. And I still have a few more I want to do down the line. But yeah, that's where you can find all of my stuff.
Awesome, brother. Listen, thank you to everyone who's listening. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you're on Spotify or iTunes, our podcast thrives on reviews. So if you enjoyed this information, please let me and David know. Drop us 5 stars. They go a long way. We're trying to overcome a lot of algorithmic suppression, considering a lot of the topics that I like to talk about. I'm sure David is very familiar with that as well. But thank you to everyone for listening. David, thanks again, brother. I'll be in touch when this is going to come out. We'll get some clips for our social media and all that.
Thanks again, fellas. Appreciate it, man.
Okay, brother. You have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Cheers.
Bye.